literally I had the biggest family musical in decades on cinema screens and a TV show that I wrote and started, and I was more unhappy than I've ever been, which is a terrible thing to realise.
Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians on the land on which we record this podcast, the Gadigal People of the Eora Nation. We pay our respects to elders past and present.
Today, I am so excited about this particular podcast. I am interviewing pretty much one of my favourite humans to ever exist in the history of all time ever. You know me. You know how much this person means to me. Today, I am interviewing the one and the only Tim Minchin, who, what the heck? Like, what the actual heck?
I have been such an avid fan of Tim for the longest time, and due to circumstances lining up with his daughter being autistic and knowing about me, he's now become a friend of mine too, which is so bizarre still and so exciting and so phenomenal. I'm so excited to have Tim on today, and also low-key pooing my pants about it. First of all, full disclaimer, I found out that I was interviewing you this morning and actual tears came out of my eye sockets.
Out of your eye sockets? That's not where they're meant to come from.
Well, they came out of there.
That's so weird. You're weird, man.
I ask this question to all of my guests, but I think it is the most fitting to ask you, what's your hyperfixation at the moment?
The reason I'm so lucky is because I quite early on was able to channel that into my work, and given that I haven't had a lot of piano lessons or learnt to compose or really I didn't get a lot of formal training in any of the places I've ended up in. It's my work, and that hasn't really gone away. So right now I'm writing a new TV script, and I'm doing some rewrites on the Groundhog Day musical, and I really just go deep into it, and I don't want to do anything else. And it's pretty great to be almost 48 and still have that love of the thing I get to do every day.
That's amazing. So you're a comedian, you're an actor, you're a writer, obviously a musician. Do you have a different approach for each of these different things that you're doing, and how do you decide what projects that you want to take on and keep it fresh?
Can I ask you about that? What like is for you the idea of approaching an acting role and approaching your writing or approaching your horses or whatever the thing you're trying to achieve that day is? Do you sort of feel like you're putting a different hat on? I think people think that's how artists work, but I'm not sure it does.
Yeah, I don't know if I put a different... I think what I do is I decide which parts of myself that are already there to showcase and accentuate, I think. And I think that's, when I'm with my horses and when I'm with people that I love and when I'm doing personal Chloé things, I'm this version of Chloé. And when people need me to be the actor or a podcast host, what the heck? And, changing it, it's like I have to become... not a different version of myself, but I guess, accentuate different versions of myself in order to achieve that.
I think that's a really nice way of describing it. And as you were saying it, I was thinking maybe it's like you've got all these versions of yourself, or you've got all this potentiality in you, hopefully everyone feels that they have some. And that doesn't have to be like, I'm going to get on stage in front of thousands of people, or I'm going to be on a hit Australian TV show like Chloé Hayden. It might just be like, I'm going to go visit my grandma and I know what she needs from me. She's having a tough day, so I need to. And it's not so much that you're putting on a mask, although I know that's different, probably different for you and me. But for me, it's like you're just opening a door and letting that stuff of you out, So I think, and sometimes that takes a little, like fake it till you make it, a little bit of, I always say fake it till you feel it. Sometimes you go, oh, well, I have the opportunity to do a podcast. That's not something I knew I could do, and I'm worried that I can't. But you almost just go, imagine if I could. What would that look like? What would opening the door to the sort of fictional version of Chloé who does a podcast, what would that be? And I think if you're really going to take risks, which I've done a lot arguably, from a position of great, knowing that people would catch me if I fall. But I think in some ways, especially when I started writing TV scripts, for example, which Upright was my first real crack at a script. And I just sort of went, let's just imagine I'm really good at this. I'll just pretend I'm really good at this, and I'll just go with that until someone tells me I'm not, And I think that's how I approach new challenges. I just I don't see there's any point pretending you're a failure or spending too much time with those thoughts, really. I'm not saying I can master those thoughts, but I try really hard to go, let's just assume that if I open that door, it'll be full of light and love and creativity, and we'll see
positivity
what happens.
and good vibes. That's such I've never consciously considered that. I'm going to start using that. I love that. I think it's such a cool way of looking at things, and I guess in a way that's kind of manifesting it and going, what is the worst that could happen? What is the worst that could happen if I do step out into this journey, and if I do this really big, really scary, but potentially really cool thing?
I think that's right. And what it is telling yourself a story that is more is less defending yourself and more giving yourself opportunities. So there's a lot of language we use, like especially if you've got a relationship with anxiety like you have and like my kid has, and I really try and I encourage Violet to think about how the tools she's had to get good at using in order to just do everyday life are actually amazing tools that a lot of people never know how to use, and you can actually like power up those mothers and you can use them. The tools you use to just go to school for a year there where you're really struggling are the same tools you use to decide you want to run for Prime Minister. They're the same kind of radical acceptance, or, that sort of some of those cognitive behavioral things of like, what is the worst that can happen and all that stuff. So I think that's all good positive language, and the idea that when you're being different things for different people and tapping into different parts of your creative self or just different types of your personality, I encourage my kids to be, or people, when I have these discussions, and especially people like, how do you have a career like yours and stuff, I try to encourage people to think I'm not faking it. I'm not pretending to be something I'm not. I'm just like cracking open a door to a version of myself that I might not have really exploited yet.
See, here's the thing. Now, I know we've spoken about this before. You don't see yourself or consider yourself to be neurodivergent, correct?
No, I don't think so. No, I don't. I certainly, until recently, until Violet and getting a bit more engaged with you cats, I think I thought of myself as, if anything, sort of hyper-normative. But I might be wrong about that. I think, there are things I see in my daughter that I recognize as stuff that I have. But I do think like an autism diagnosis is like, a lot of people have some of the elements of it, but they don't tick all the boxes that would make that category quite right, I think the main place that I've started noticing in recent years, this thing that I thought was just that this is how a normal, logical person thinks about the world, it's caused me a great deal of frustration in my life, that if I go, but clearly this is the data and this is the evidence and these are the logical steps you take, avoiding these logical fallacies, and this is the conclusion. Now I've walked you through that, you're going to agree with what I think, and they don't. And I have found that very, very distressing. And you can see that in my music, in my early comedy. Yes. The anger is a conceit. He's a character. I'm not an angry person. But the frustration, even in my, the latest thing I got in trouble with online, my latest monologue about confirmation bias and treating people kindly and stuff, you can feel my frustration. And I've realized that might be something to have a think about, that not everyone's brains work the same way. And I sort of thought they did, I think. I thought it was just education was the only difference, just information was the only difference, but it's actually interpretation.
The funny thing that I've discovered about the typicals, as I like to call them, the tips, is that the things that are so logical doesn't make sense to most neurotypical people, because they more have a societal bias, as in, this is how we have to do things because of what society has taught me that I need to be. So logic and stuff isn't part of their brain. Whereas I find like, I know for me, and I've spoken to Violet about this as well, and the amount of autistic and neurodivergent and magical people that I've spoken to, we don't have that aspect of society says this, because we don't have that part of our brain that says, oh, we need to fit in, because we weren't born to fit in. So we go, that doesn't make sense that you're doing that, which I think is quite similar to what you're talking about.
Yeah, that's probably true. And even your character in Heartbreak, you know, these lovely moments, and some of how she represented autism was what I told you when I met you the first time. One of the hardest things as a parent is to see for the first time your kid really get to panic and to be stimming uncontrollably and stuff, and it feels really like something's really wrong. You know, if you don't understand that, it's very, very hard. And for a little while there, Vi was, you know, having terrible sort of panic things where she'd almost go unconscious because she was so not able to breathe properly and stuff. And I thought the only other time I've ever seen almost exactly how she behaved was your character. So that, I mean, that's a whole conversation about representation that, you know, you and I barely need to have, because obviously we're so deeply in it. You in a way that I'm not, but me in a sort of, because I'm sort of a producer these days and stuff, I'm in it from the other side as well. But not specifically with autism, just in terms of representation. But the other thing I loved about your character is just that she wasn't the most autistic person you've ever seen in terms of not being able to pick up social cues, you know, but she did have this sort of like, well, this is how it is, so why aren't we pursuing it on those terms? And I don't suppose I'm neurodivergent, but I haven't been checked out. But I certainly have a lifetime of sort of saying things that people go, you don't say that stuff. And I'm like, but it's true. You know, it's like, that's the true stuff. And it's actually more than just true. It really matters.
Yeah, of course. I think something that is incredible about your music and your writing is the fact that you do voice these frustrations, and you do it in a way that is so magnificently magical and done in a way which I've never seen done before. And I think that's why I've clicked with your writing so much, because you say things that make sense and that other people either haven't thought of saying or haven't had the balls to say or just simply don't consider. And your way of doing it is incredible, and you've done it in so many different aspects, so many forms. You're so open about your political beliefs, your societal beliefs. How long did it take you to become comfortable with discussing these sorts of things, knowing that there could be adversity and controversy that came with it?
I grew up in a slightly different world from the one we're in now, both that I grew up in Perth in a sort of quite cloistered, sort of privileged area, you know, sort of world. Not like ski trips and helicopters privilege, just like comfortable. And I think, and because I sort of went to a school where I had to wear a tie and go to chapel, and I think the instinct to push back against conformity, and I was a 90s kid, remember, and that era was very defined by pushback against conformity and the idea that it was a bit punk influenced, you know. So I don't think I had as many barriers to being opinionated as an equivalent person would now. I don't think I was too, in fact, I mean, the fact is I was like playing in cover bands, Chloé, and I was like earning no money, and I got rejected by every agent in Australia, and I sort of needed someone to fucking listen to me. So I was motivated to be a bit sort of exposed and a bit edgy, and in ways that not only has the politics changed, but I've changed. There's things I wouldn't say and do now because I'm a different person living in a different world. But I was motivated to do something different, and something different in my case was, what if I played the piano like a person who's very formal and trained, but what was coming out of my mouth was absolute anti-establishment, you know? And so it was sort of punk cabaret. And as soon as I found it and people laughed and watched, I thought, all right, we'll do this for a bit.
And it's clearly resonated. Like, you are doing, I mean, you don't need to hear this from me, but you're doing incredible. And people adore you, and for good reason. You're doing something which I think is so unique and so different, and sometimes I guess controversial in a way that people actually need to hear, and that people have been maybe too scared to hear or haven't had the opportunity to hear. And I don't know, like you can probably touch on this, but I feel like hearing what could be seen as controversial topics done through a comedy lens and through a music lens as well can make these topics a lot more palatable.
That's certainly the idea, and when I'm in a theatre and I'm playing and there's 1,000 or 2,000 people sitting in seats watching me, I'm very confident that I can take them through all sorts of stuff, that I can sort of slightly make them feel uncomfortable or slightly shock them or wonder if I'm on their side or not, and then bring them back and help. I can even call, because this last tour, I was so aware that my audience is educated liberals, I thought, well, if I'm going to rant, like, I can't just preach to the choir. There's no point just G'ing up people who are part of my tribe. I need to look at where we're going wrong, where people like who will be in my audience, where we're being obstructive, where we're doing what the other side are doing. And so I even kind of called we progressives on our shit a bit. I kind of, and so all of that is possible in a theatre, once it gets out on DVD, as we used to call it, once it gets released onto a streaming platform and bits get chopped up and stuff, it's much, much scarier and not so easy to do what you're saying, which is sugar the pill. Use comedy to sugar the pill.
Knowing that you do talk about some topics and you've had your own share of adversity and controversy in your career, how do you deal with the critics, and how do you deal with people that don't like you for who you are and for what you're showing?
I don't deal with it very well at all.
Me too.
I wish I could. I wish people say, why do you listen to them? They're just dumb and they're not. They're disingenuous, when you get piled on. And I've been piled on traditionally mostly by the conservative right because of my stuff about religion and particularly in Australia because of Cardinal Pell. Fundamentally, the thing I am, and maybe this points to your suspicions about my neurotype, is I'm deeply anti-tribal. I'm very suspicious of tribes. And I know they can be very useful, but I'm suspicious of them enveloping people entirely. It's fine to go, I identify here and identify there, and these are the people I'm defending and these are the people I'm speaking up for. I mean, you're a perfect example of someone who you're like, I'm a neurodivergent person and I'm going to speak on behalf, because I have a platform. That's all amazing. But this idea of us and themism, that the job is not to reach out across the divide, but to retain the divides, it's killing me. But the fact is, when people say things about me online that don't resonate with who I see myself as, and I don't think they resonate with what I've said, I find it so distressing, and I don't know what to do about it. Really, it's really awful when in public people are abusing you, and the abuse is one thing, but the misrepresentation, that's a real chip I have, is that I don't like being
misconstrued and misrepresented.
Misrepresented. Yeah. I'm happy to fall on my sword for stuff I've said, but not for stuff I haven't said. It's really distressing.
How do you look after your mental health with all of this happening?
So I'm really not quite sure. Like at the end of last year when Matilda and Upright 2 and my special back, which is the stuff that's a bit edgier or it has stuff that's complicated in it, it all came out at the same time, and I was doing a lot of press. And it wasn't even one thing or the other. It's just being scrutinised, and that's why we do it. I want people to scrutinise my work, and I've made myself the thing I am, and I want attention. I wanted attention. That's why I'm here. I wanted it, but my God, I got really, literally, I had the biggest family musical in decades on cinema screens and a TV show that I wrote and started, and I was more unhappy than I've ever been, which is a terrible thing to realise.
Would you consider yourself an activist?
I certainly no, I don't think so. I'm someone who has always found injustice difficult to cope with, but I'm no saint. You know, I, like all of us, the things that are in our faces worry us, but we somehow manage to not worry about all the horrible things happening in other places, in other corners of the internet or other places in the world. I became quite knowledgeable about the intersection of religion and bigotry, right? It was my special interest, I suppose. I was very, very interested in belief and why people believe weird shit, that isn't supported by evidence or data. And I happened to also be quite arty, so I turned that stuff into art. And then that gave me power. And when I had power, I was very compelled to make sure I got that right, which, again, I didn't always get right. But I was able to leverage that power into helping people, into supporting marriage equality plebiscites or supporting sexual abuse survivors. I think and now I do charity, like I give money away now, not as much as I should, but I've worked out how to leverage my tours so that there's a charity. There's always a charity element to my shows. So there's a certain amount of seats and all that.
Well, alongside charity as well, I guess, I wanted to touch on that. From November to January, I think it is, every year, you donate proceeds of your song White Wine in the Sun to autism charities in Australia and the UK as well, is it?
Yeah, isn't my relationship with autism long and slightly spooky?
Yeah, it's a little bit, it's a bit niche, Tim.
Bit niche, yeah. Well, ever since I wrote it, the money's gone to autism charities.
Was that before you knew that Violet was autistic?
Well,
because of?
I wrote it when Violet was 3 weeks old.
Right, so probably not an autism diagnosis at 3 weeks then.
It was about 13 years early. The reason I was interested in autism is because I grew up with another family member who's autistic with a lot of needs.
Right.
So that was where my interest came.
I'd love to ask as well, just on obviously being the dad of an incredible, magical autistic woman, if there's any parents of autistic children, is there anything that you would want them to know on how to parent your autistic or just child in general?
Well, it would seem weird for me to neurotip-splain autism on your podcast.
Tim, the more I'm speaking to you, the more and more I'm thinking that you do not fit the neurotip. I don't think you have to. I think you can jump from that ship.
There's lots of neurotips on the ship. Maybe I'm an atypical neurotip.
Maybe.
I find one of the difficult things to talk about when I'm talking about autism. Well, firstly, I don't talk about it much because I'm not an expert, and it's not my experience. It's not really mine to talk about it. I pulled back a bit on talking about Violet even. I'm talking about her with you because of this is your podcast and you're you and you know Vi. But I'm sort of, it's not my story particularly.
Of course.
But and what's difficult is that the experiences of autistic people and their parents and their carers, in the case of people who really need a lot of care, is very, very different, even though we have this wonderful spectrum. I can only speak to the experience of very low needs autistic kid. But I do think, given that that's where all the huge rise in diagnoses is happening, it's worth saying that it's really helpful for people who find the world hard to negotiate and that extra calorie burn, the extra cognitive burn that they've been doing for years to try and negotiate a complex world has quite literally burnt them out. And this is why especially ASD girls aren't diagnosed till their teens when they melt down, which is absolutely Violet was completely typical in this way. She hit 13 and basically, hit puberty and just
out comes autism.
Just completely out comes autism. Yeah, she just melted. And And then, of course, retrospectively, it's like all the way back to all her separation anxiety and difficulty sleeping and all that. It all paints a picture. The power of a diagnosis, and I understand some people aren't gagging for a diagnosis. They don't want their kid to be anything. They don't want their kid to be called anything. They just want them to be their own special kid. The power of a diagnosis is in giving the kid context for their pain. And
a label that makes sense, because human beings label things anyway, because we have little pea brains and have to label everything.
Yeah, that's
and most
right.
kids are already labeled. And most kids, like myself and probably like Violet, were labeled as weird and strange and like, you're a bit quirky.
Yeah.
Getting the autism label doesn't give us a label. It changes the label to something that we can actually understand.
I hadn't really thought of it like that, but that's of course right. You're gonna in a high school situation, you're gonna be called anything from odd to the R word. Why not? Why not wear your sunflower? You know. So the other thing it gives, not only does it give the kid a sense of where they sit and who they are and why they feel the way they feel, it gives you as a parent a bit of a rule book. You get all these tools.
Understanding.
And for me as a parent brought up by kind of like, pull your socks up, you know, stop your whinging, we won't have any tears, you know, of course, that was my generation.
Yes.
And because I loved my parents, and I'm one of 4 very well kids and now old people, because I back my parents' parenting, I sort of thought, well, I'll do the same. I'll be like, stop mucking around, you're wasting your time, put your shoes on. And, you know, for years I had this kid who I was pushing through these moments of extreme, Violet she's much better now, but had real difficulty with transition. And I was like bullying her through it because I was her dad and I loved her and I wanted to teach her resilience and responsibility and all those things you're meant to teach kids. And then as soon as I got this diagnosis, I just went, all right, I can flick that switch off and never do it again. And it was such a relief that I was allowed to do that.
My dad had such a similar experience. You and my dad. First of all, there's articles saying that you're my dad. It was like, we don't know much about Chloé Hayden's parents, but here's a photo of her with her father, and it's us together.
Yay! You can come and stay. I don't want to steal you off your dad, but you're very welcome to come for dinner sometimes.
I'll take you up on the offer. But as similarly, my dad grew up Irish Catholic and grew up very traditional,
right.
And grew up, you know, with these, this is the way things are and this is the way that you raise kids and you know, all that sort of stuff. And in some ways he was very, I don't think lenient is the word, but was very, you know, this is Chloe and she's a bit quirky and different and she does things in her Chloe quirky different way. But in other ways, similar to you with Violet when she was growing up, it was, you know, pull your head in, rein yourself in, this is how we do things. And then after my diagnosis, my psychologist sat down with him and was like, hey, like you pull your head in.
Yeah.
And he was like, oh. And I think, I guess as a parent, the diagnosis isn't just for your kid, it is for you too. It changes everything.
Yeah, I think that's right.
I do want to quickly touch on Matilda because obviously that is how I discovered you. I have already said all of this to you before, but I discovered Matilda for the first time about 9 years ago now. And at this point in my life, I was really going through it and I had never seen myself represented. I didn't know who I was. I didn't know what that meant. I didn't think I was supposed to be here. And then I heard the Matilda soundtrack and it was like a light had gone off in my head and I was like, oh, someone gets it. And I know I'm also not the only neurodivergent person who has felt that resonation to Matilda. Why do you think she and her story and your music to her story has resonated so deeply with neurodivergent people?
I don't know. I mean, again, you can speak to that more and I'll never get sick of you telling me that because it is an extraordinary thing. And since the film's come out, it's just like order of magnitude more feedback about these songs. I mean, the kids are singing these songs now just all over the world. And I think I'm probably an okay writer. And I think being an okay writer involves having some capacity to place yourself in another person's shoes. And if that character's a fictional 6-year-old who can read 7 novels in a week and who lives in a house with television constantly on, it's quite, and by the way, understands relativity and wonders about, colour theory and all that. It's not a huge leap to go, well, that would be a very noisy place. Her brain would be a real handful for a little kid to have a brain like that. And I wonder what this thing that she eventually is able to do, I wonder what that comes from, and what once she's done it she feels, and how she escapes that. And so I think it's coincidental, but it's not just that song. I think the fire in Miss Honey's heart, which is her house, and I think even the way Matilda unpacks her story in such a me kind of way, Jack and Jill, was inevitable they were going to fall down because that was how they were written. And I don't really know why, given that it's written in the stars, that Romeo and Juliet, the first thing that you hear in Romeo and Juliet is two star-crossed lovers take their lives. Why, when you've heard it at the beginning, why didn't they change the end? It's a slight abstract thing, but there's something quite literal about it,
Which I think is why I love your writing so much, because it is, and I guess literal is the right way to put it. It is exactly what it is. There's no hidden meanings. There's no, let's talk about this, but we're actually talking about this. What you say is what you get. And the entire soundtrack, and I have different songs. Each day I have a different song from Matilda that I'm like, this is today's song. And it started off being quiet. It was naughty for a very long time. When I Grow Up is one currently that I'm like, oh, I feel this. Both of Miss Honey's songs are impeccable and make me cry. Every time I even hear the opening soundtrack, you have such, and I have said this a million times before, I am very convinced you are the reincarnation of Mozart and Picasso and every great artist combined.
All right. Okay.
Not to give you an ego boost, but
no, I love it. I love
you.
it, and I really, really appreciate it. And the greatest joy of my life, apart from my weird little kids, is my little family. Is this impact that Matilda's had, and I could talk on and on and on about the opportunity I was given and about Matthew, beautiful Matthew. So there's another story here, and that's the director, Matthew Warchus, who directed the play and the movie. And Matthew's a very special mind, and probably if he was alive and if he was a kid in this era, they might have a little look at where he fits. He's one of my very, very favourite people, but he's a very inward kind of creature, and he has a beautiful mind, and I think that is part of what you're getting when you love Matilda. But yeah, the fact that I have helped someone like you, and that you're not the only one, it feels, if I liked the word blessed, I'd say blessed. Quite like the word blessed is all right.
Blessed. Before we go, there's 3 questions called the Boldly Me 3, and it's just 3 little quick fire questions if you would be so inclined.
As you know, Chloe, I'm amazing at short answers, so let's do it.
Yes, amazing.
It's my best thing. Short answers are my best thing.
Me too. Okay, so the first one is, what's one song that never fails to make you feel happy?
I'm going to go with Aerosmith's Don't Want to Miss a Thing. It makes me happy you don't even know that song. It makes me happy in a karaoke kind of way. I just sung it the other night.
Oh, fun.
At the Sydney Theatre Company fundraiser. I had all these middle-aged people on their feet, and other ages too, on their feet singing this ridiculous hair rock romantic ballad from the 90s.
Oh my God, that's cool.
That song has made me smile a lot over the last few weeks because I've decided it's the greatest sing-along of all time, so I've been rolling it out at gigs.
Oh, I love it. I think that's a wicked answer. Okay, second one is, what is one piece of advice that you would give your 13-year-old self?
I guess I would say to him that thing where you play the piano all the time instead of doing your homework. Keep doing that. That's good.
I love that. The last question I have, this one's a bit more funky. If you could be any Disney character, who would you be and why?
That's the world's most ASD question.
Thank you.
Always comes back to Disney.
Thanks, I'm autistic. It's a special interest.
I would be grumpy.
Man,
Because he gets to tell it like it is.
No way. I'm disputing that.
Who would I be? I'd be, I don't know any Disney characters. I want to be one of the sort of weird gothic ones.
Have you ever seen Princess and the Frog? There's this character in it, and he's called the Shadow Man. And I think that's what his name is. And he's like this really like, he's an evil guy, but
That's me.
Subtracts. Perfect. Done. Well, that unfortunately does it for my questions. But thank you so immensely much for spending your time with me today.
It's a pleasure. I very much enjoy talking to you.
I feel like I could have spoken to Tim for ages. I have so many more questions that I didn't even have time and managed to get out. He's such an incredible human being. What the heck?
Guys, if you haven't seen Tim's work, if you haven't seen Matilda, literally stop what you're doing right now this very second. Matilda the Musical, the movie, is on Netflix right now. Please go and watch it. This isn't a promo, by the way. I'm literally just telling you that you need to watch this. Like, this is your homework right now. Please go and do it. It will change your life forever. 110% guaranteed. What an exciting time. Oh my goodness. Thank you so much for listening to Boldly Me. If you liked what you heard, make sure to rate and review the show on your podcast app if it lets you, and feel free to tell a friend. Most importantly, be kind to yourself, be kind to others, and do whatever makes you feel happy. Goodbye.